The first official sitting of the legislature has ended, and according to social media posts from UCP MLAs and ministers, there was plenty to celebrate. That is, unless you're a youth earning minimum wage, or you're an LGBTQ kid who wants to start a GSA, or you're concerned about climate change, or you're in a union that's currently trying to bargain a contract. In that case, it's not so great. We're going to take a look at all of that coming up on The Breakdown. To start off this edition of The Breakdown, we wanted to go back and revisit one of the topics that we talked about in our last episode, which is the whole question of the UCP's election promise to cut back pay for MLAs and the Premier. For those of you that don't know, during the last election, the UCP got together and they said that if they were elected, all UCP MLAs would immediately take a 5% pay cut and the Premier would take a 10% pay cut. And they were really clear about using the word immediately. Well, it's been about 4 months since the election, and they haven't taken that pay cut yet. Now, even more alarming is the fact that because they didn't do anything with that while they were sitting in the last session, the next session that they'll have the opportunity to do this in is going to be in late October, and by then we're looking at roughly 6 months of time. To give you an idea of what the real cost that is going to bring to Albertans, an MLA makes $127,000, $296 a year. A minister makes $190,000, and the Premier makes roughly $206,000. Now, it's important to be clear that those are base amounts. So if they work on committees, or if they carry portfolios, or if they're House leaders, those numbers go up pretty quickly as well. But those are the base numbers that we worked with. And what we worked out is that the cost to Albertans for the UCP not having taken their pay cut when they promised they would works out to about $50,000 a month. And that's just the cost from the UCP MLAs. Overall, by the time that we look at the full 6-month time period, we're looking at a cost to Albertans of $300,000. Now, $300,000 buys a lot of kids' lunches. It could fund a lot of youth programs. So at this point, I only have one question. Can we have that money back, please? The UCP Leadership Scandal continues to drag on. Now, it's been almost 2 years since the UCP leadership race happened, but we're still learning more and more about what went on during that leadership race, and the investigation into irregularities into that race continues to build momentum. This week, for example, we learned that a total of 5 ministers have now been interviewed by the RCMP in regards to improper conduct that may or may not have happened during the leadership race. We've also learned that multiple MLAs have been interviewed by the RCMP as well. But the most shocking news that we got this week has to do with the candidate who's actually the center of a lot of the controversy, Jeff Callaway. For those of you that don't know, Jeff Callaway is the guy that a lot of people believe ran as a dark horse candidate, and his only purpose was to try to take out Brian Jean to clear Jason Kenney's path to victory in the leadership race. This week we learned Jeff Callaway was fined $70,000 for illegal behavior that he took part of during that leadership race. This brings the total amount of fines issued in that leadership race to $170,000, which is just over half the amount that the province of Alberta would save if the UCP MLAs and the Premier actually took the pay cut that they promised that they took when they took it, but they haven't yet. But that's a separate issue entirely. There's a bunch going on here, and it's going to be a long time until we find out what all of the answers. But one of the really interesting tidbits in all of this is that Jeff Callaway and his leadership team haven't yet been kicked out of the UCP party, which begs a really important question. Given that the Elections Commissioner has found that they took part in behaviors that cost them $170,000 in fines, why haven't they been kicked out yet? Associate Minister of Addictions and MLA for Calgary Foothills, Jason Luan, got himself into a bit of hot water this week when, during a bit of a Twitter debate, he threw this tweet up here. And it's a bit of a strange tweet, particularly for somebody who's the Associate Minister of Addictions, because not only does it seem to imply that research, evidence-based research no less, that's foundational to the treatment of addictions and is accepted by addictions experts around the world is somehow not to be trusted, but he takes it a step farther, and he seems to imply as well that all of this research that has been used to save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives, is somehow funded by Big Pharma, which is an old conspiracy theory trope and not something that you'd normally expect to see from a minister. Now, in fairness, the tweet was very quickly deleted, and Jason Luan did send out a spokesperson. He didn't actually come out and say it himself, but he did send out a spokesperson who was very quick to say that this tweet was taken out of context and that Jason Luan actually allegedly has a very open mind towards the efficacy of safe injection sites. But nonetheless, it's incredibly bad optics for the minister who's reviewing safe injection sites to throw something like that up. And there's a lot of people who work in addictions, as well as family members of people who have died from addictions, who are really, really concerned, because something like this is terrible optics. But it seems like if there's one thing that the UCP is really, really good at, aside from rolling back social progress, taking away rights from LGBTQ kids, cutting back minimum wage, and changing the rules under which unions negotiate with the government, it's bad optics. And for a really bad example of bad optics, one needs look no farther than the Minister of Community and Social Services and MLA for Calgary Northeast, Rajan Sani. If you didn't pay attention during the election, one of the things that Rajan made a big deal about was her experience with the oil and gas world. And she talked quite a bit about how she has decades of experience working in oil gas. Now, there's no explicit rule that says that when somebody's elected, they can't have any other jobs, but it's generally accepted that if there's any kind of perceived conflict of interest, whether real or just perceived, that person should probably step away from that role and take a leave of absence. Now, one of our researchers was doing background on this episode. They went to the FRACMOD website and they noticed that Rajan is still listed as a vice president for that company. Now, it would be entirely reasonable to take a look at that website and say, well, you know what, Rajan and the UCP have been incredibly busy rolling back rights for LGBTQ kids, cutting minimum wage, and all the other things that the UCP government has been very, very busy doing. Maybe they just haven't had time to update that website. So we then went to her LinkedIn profile to check to see whether or not that had been updated. And sure enough, it shows not only that she was elected and that she holds the position in government that she currently does, but it also currently lists her as the vice president for FRACMOD Industries. Now, this is where the optics start to get really, really bad, because while Rajan is the Minister of Community and Social Services, a lot of her social media posts and a lot of the public lines that she's been using have to do with getting the economy restarted, and particularly have to do with getting oil and gas going. So now we have an elected official who using her platform to support an industry that she privately gains from. But we have another couple of questions that we'd like to clarify. In particular, did Ms. Sani vote for the corporate tax cut? Because if she did, the company that she currently is still listed as a vice president of would directly benefit from that. But secondarily, did she also vote against or vote to repeal the carbon tax? Because again, if she did, the company that she's currently listed as a vice president for would directly benefit from that. Now, whether or not this is a real conflict of interest is up for lawyers to decide, but I would encourage and invite Rajan to publicly clarify whether or not she still is a vice president for FRACMOD and whether or not she considers that to be any kind of conflict of interest. Because as we've seen with all of the behaviors from the UCP, conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest seem to be something that they're really good at. So I would love to see, as a constituent of Calgary Northeast, Rajan come out and make it clear where exactly she stands on this issue, because this is the kind of transparency that the constituents of Calgary Northeast deserve. At this point, I would like to introduce a new segment on The Breakdown. One of the things that we've heard from some of our viewers is that we spend a lot of time trying to speak truth to power, and that comes off as a little bit negative. So we're trying to introduce some positive elements to The Breakdown, and the way that we're going to try to do that on an ongoing basis is by interviewing local politicians as well as major community members and trying to learn a little bit more about what's going on in our community and try to bring a little bit of positivity. So for our very first interview, given that we film in this field because we're still waiting for our high school, we decided to get an update on the status of the high school from none other than Althea Adams, who's the Calgary School Board Trustee for Wards 3 and 4, and also the Vice Chair of the Calgary Board of Education. So here's that interview for you. Welcome to the first official interview segment on The Breakdown, and appropriately enough, given that we film in the field that we're waiting for, the Calgary North High School, we have Ward 3 and 4 School Board Trustee and Vice Chair of the Calgary School Board, Althea Adams, with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Althea.
Thank you so much for having me.
So obviously there's a couple of big questions that we have in regards to the high school. First of all, I know that it's been off and on the capital plan since 2004. Where are we at now?
Well, last spring we were granted design funding for the high school, which is absolutely fantastic. So that process has begun. We had an open house actually just on June 26th where we showcased the plans, the potential plans for the high school, and we got community input as well as from the community associations that would be participating in the school. So that was really, really great. Got a lot of feedback from there. So now the next step is they're going to take that feedback away, they're going over it, and then they're going to come back. And they're going to show what it is that we're actually looking at for the high school.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, though, that design funding at best gets us a picture of a high school.
Yes, it gets us to the permit stage. Okay. And then the funding runs out until we get construction dollars.
Okay. So where do the construction dollars come from?
That comes from the provincial government. We're hoping for, of course, school announcements, as I'm sure every board in the province is hoping for as well, with the provincial budget coming out in the fall. Our top two are currently both have design funding. So we're really hopeful that both of those schools get full funding.
The community of Coventry Hills in particular, but I think all of the communities in Northern Hills have a fairly long history of, let's call it activism, in regards to trying to advocate to get this high school built, and I can't remember a time where we were as close to where we are now in regards to getting it built. That being said, what can community members do in order to help move the needle maybe a little bit closer towards making sure that we get the funding for the high school?
Well, I think one of the key things, I actually brought one along. This is our 3-year capital plan. Okay. And in here it actually talks about the North High School and our need for the North High School. One of the important things to understand is we're seeing a big bubble in high school students. And in September 2023, we are going to be over capacity.
With this high school that's opening?
Even without. With or without, we're going to be over capacity. Okay. So what's happening, we're seeing this massive bubble as it moves up. Of course, we saw it in the elementary. We saw a whole bunch of elementary schools being built, and now we're building a whole bunch of middle schools, and we're watching this bubble come. So we know it's going to hit us at 2023. So even with this high school, we are going to be over capacity. So we are, in fact, in desperate need for a high school. And as it stands right now, this is our only new high school on the capital plan. There are no other high schools right now for Calgary.
So this high school isn't just important for Coventry Hills, Harvest Hills, Panorama. If we don't get this high school and we're at that much over 1,800 students more over capacity, that's going to have a trickle-down effect through most of the other high schools in the north end of the city, I imagine.
Absolutely. We're already expecting to be over 100% for all high schools. Even with this high school built, we're still going to be over 100%. But it's going to obviously be better because we're going to have that many more spots. So that's really important to understand. The other thing that's happening as of right now is we're actually doing an engagement right now on our high schools themselves, because we do have a bit of a mismatch when it comes to our high schools, when it comes to their enrollment levels. We have some that are a little bit low and some that are way over capacity. So what we're doing right now is probably going to take 2 years, is we're doing an engagement with all the communities to see how we can better align some of these high schools to make it so they're all more around the 80-85% versus having some at 50% and some at like 120%. But again, like I said, even doing all that and with this high school opening, we're still going to be over 100% capacity. So it is desperately, desperately needed. So I would say the biggest thing that people can arm themselves with is data right now, because the data shows us that we absolutely need the school, and I think that's really important.
So when you say data, like if I'm let's say I'm a dad who has 2 kids, ages 6 and 8, just making that up. Yep. What can I do to make sure that the odds of getting the high school go up?
Well, as it stands right now, as you know, it's in the hands of the provincial government. They're putting together a budget, and they'll allocate funds to, of course, all the areas, including education. And we're hoping in there is going to be the school builds. But that's your best bet, is to keep advocating to the province. Okay. And I would keep talking about the numbers too, because we are in such a high need.
Okay. Should parents be emailing?
You can email your local MLAs and do it that way as well. You can email even the Minister of Education, and you can just keep going from there. Okay. But it's important to make your voice heard as well. But I think what's really important to understand too is that we've really taken the politics out of the capital plan. It really is data driven. which is absolutely fantastic. So that makes it a lot easier to advocate for it because it's absolutely data driven. So as we know right now, we need to have this high school built.
Well, if there's one thing I would hope that everybody can agree on, it's the notion that education really is the silver bullet for so many of our social problems and social
absolutely.
challenges. And it's one of the best areas that I think that any level of government can spend money regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. So.
Well, and absolutely. And actually one of the other things that's top on our list is our modernizations for our schools, because as you know, we have 50% of our schools are over 50 years old. So that's a huge issue too. And one of them the top one on our modernization list is actually Diefenbaker High School, which I kind of made a joke about earlier today when I was sitting in this desk, that this might be a little bit like a Diefenbaker desk.
So
no offense, Diefenbaker.
Love
you guys.
I might be able to get some
yeah.
more of these desks if that modernization happens.
But again, that's one of our schools that it's on top of our list for our remodernization. It's one of our high schools, and it needs to be brought up to date. And it's not just, the building itself being brought up to date with, roofs and walls and all that kind of good stuff, but it's also bringing it up to date. So for the educational part, for robotics, for all the new programs that are out there, for all the STEM programs out there, like we need to bring our high schools up to a point, well, in all of our schools, so that they can offer these programs so that our students can be exactly that, have the best education they can get.
What would be in regards to your job, what would be the one thing that you wished that parents of kids who are currently in the education system knew about what it is that you do?
Oh. About what it is that I do. Well, that's very interesting.
Well, I think a lot of people have a perception that politicians are incredibly overpaid. I think a lot of people have a perception that a lot of politicians, for them, it's a full-time, relaxed job.
Yeah.
Does a school board trustee put in full-time hours?
I mean, we call it a part-time job, and it's paid as a part-time job, but I mean, we do. We put in a lot of hours, and I would say there are weeks where I put in more than full-time hours into it. So, I mean, it's just the way that it goes.
To me, I think it's fascinating that, as you said, it's a part-time gig. You're paid part-time, but you work full-time hours. And I think that it's things like that if people were more aware of, they'd be able to appreciate the incredible effort that all of the school board trustees put into.
Yeah, and our board in particular, we meet during the day. Our meetings are during the day. Part of that are over the lunch hours too, because we like to have public be able to come in during their lunch hour. There's a lot of boards that actually do everything in the evenings, so that people can even have a full-time job So it's a bit of a balance. Like I do have a second job. I have a part-time job as well that I also do. So there's a bit of a balance, but it's busy. It's very busy work, but it's also very rewarding work too.
I imagine.
Yeah.
I imagine. Well, thank you so much for being willing to come on and sit in these ridiculous little desks and have this conversation.
I love them. I love them.
Well,
I'm not going to say it takes me entirely back to my childhood, but it might not be too far off.
I'm in the same boat. There was a little bit of deja vu when I picked it up. So, and yeah, hopefully,
If we get any big news about the high school, you might be willing to come back on and talk about it some more.
Absolutely, anytime.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
all right, that's it then. Well done, team.
Okay, film him getting out of this desk.
I think that one's still running.
I am going to leave that room.
I think I could sideways it. There we go.
This was our 6th episode of The Breakdown, and we're going to take a little bit of a break for the summer now, but we will be coming back in September, and we've got some really exciting things lined up. We've got a couple of guests coming down the pipes that I'm really looking forward to, and there's going to be no shortage of things to talk about, whether it's the continued investigation into the UCP leadership race or the federal election that we're heading into. But before we go away for our little break, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to sort of get off my chest and share, because one of the big things that I think that we learned out of this election is that people were willing to make a lot of compromises in regards to who they voted for, whether they voted for the NDP or they voted for the UCP. The overriding thing was that people were concerned about the economy and people were concerned about jobs, and they were willing to vote for whoever they believed was going to do a best job of that, regardless of what their personal bad behavior might have looked like. We're heading into a federal election, and I'm going to be really clear. I don't know who I'm going to vote for yet. I don't know who I'm going to be able to support yet, because I'm looking at the field of candidates that we have so far, both at the federal level as well as the federal leader level, and I'm really quite disappointed. The people that we have running so far don't seem to be able to represent what Canada is. There's a lot of divisiveness that's going on, there's a lot of anger that's going on, and quite frankly, there's a lot of childishness going on, and that's not what Canada was about. We had Canada Day just a couple weeks ago, and Canada Day, to me, we watched people from across the country pull together and celebrate the idea of what Canada could be. And if I was going to sum up the idea of what Canada could be, Canada is a country that doesn't have a finish line. Canada's not ever going to be done. We will always have something that we can do better. One of the things that makes me proud to be a Canadian is the fact that we're able to own our mistakes, we're able to learn from them, we're able to acknowledge them, and we're able to try to move forward from those. Canadians aren't a cowardly people. We're a proud people and we're a brave people. And when we can see that we've done something wrong, or we can see that we can do things better, we acknowledge that and we move on. This is why Canada has a proud tradition as peacekeepers around the world. This is why Canada has a proud tradition of being leaders of industry. And it's that that's going to take Canada forward, and we need to demand that level of leadership from our politicians and from our elected representatives. The time for childish politicians and childish behavior and infantile arguments is done. And what I would ask all of you is, during the summer, you're going to have people coming to your doors, they're going to be knocking on your doors, they're going to be asking for your vote. When you're talking to them, don't just let them know that you want to see some mature, adult Canadian representation from them, but demand it from them and let them know that you're going to be holding them to account. Because if there's one thing that the breakdown is trying to be, it's trying to be a way that we can hold people to account and we can say, do better. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in September. Let me just think about how I'm going to start this. It's going to be good, whatever it is. You just wait in suspense there. Hold on. I'm going to tell you. MLAs all across the... No, again. Breathe the... No. To start off this week's epedition. It's an epedition. It's like an episode and an edition. It's because we're so reliable with when we put it out. It's an epedition. Nope. Catch last time's episode, we talked about the fact that Jason Kenney and the UCP during the campaign promised that MLAs would take a voluntary 5% pay cut, and that the Prime Minister, he wants to be the Prime Minister. Everybody knows it, and I just called him it. Let's do that again, put in this pay cut. And that works out to about, friggin', do it again. Numbers, works out to numbers, big numbers, about $50,000 a month. The and I like using the word allegedly. Not a really, again, leadership, right? Okay, let's do that again. Let's do that again. Campaign, let's do that again. Let's try that again. To a, almost there. Reloading. Go back and revisit one of the things that we talked about on our last episode, which is the question of the UCP promises to cut pay for MLAs and the Premier, not just people in the province. They're cutting pay left, right, and center. Just wait until after the federal election. Let's do that again. I'm Slim Shady, the real Slim Shady. All you other Slim Shadys are just imitating. So won't the real Slim Shady please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. I'm like a head trip to listen to. You didn't record that, did you?